there might be more going on here than I realised. But some albums have a real consistency to them. They have a real identity, musically, vibe-wise. And they had it on that album like they'd never had it before or have ever had it since. There was something, an essence.
Closing proceedings with the kind of breakneck, hardcore thrashings of Damaging could be seen as a bit of an anticlimactic mistake. It broke the dynamic. It was almost like a step back after you had Orion just taking it in a complete new area. Maybe it was something just to say to the people who'd complained about Ride the Lightning being a bit of a sellout to the mainstream, look, we can still do this. But it can be looked upon as just a bit of a filler rather than a thriller stuck on the end just to, pad out the album to its immense 50 minutes.
Okay, Damage Incorporated is the closer, and it comes after the relatively gentle Orion. Plus, there's also about a minute-long, sort of dreamlike bass-led intro to Damage Incorporated. So you're almost put into this false sense of security. And then suddenly it comes at you like a greyhound from the traps. It is another full-on thrash metal classic, up there with Battery as one of the greatest thrash metal songs ever written. I mean, it absolutely shreds, and when Hetfield screams the word, go, Kirk Hammett comes out with really one of the fastest, most aggressive guitar solos you will ever hear to this day. Lyrically, it's just about standing up for yourself, fighting the power against all odds, in rather grim detail, has to be said. It's a very violent song. It's a perfect way to close the album. And it's the one deviation they made, funnily enough, going back to the whole idea of Ride the Lightning being a prototype for Master of Puppets. It's the one deviation they made, because on Ride the Lightning they finished with the instrumental Call of Cthulhu. That wouldn't have worked on Master of Puppets, so Orion would not have been a good way to close the album, because it's just too gentle. You need to close the album with a mighty kick up the arse, just to keep fresh in your mind what a heavy unit Metallica is. So Damage Incorporated does that job perfectly.
The metal media definitely got Master of Puppets. They really saw that this was an interesting move forward. But I don't think it really made an enormous impact initially. With kind of, retrospect, we can see that it is an incredibly important album in the whole, history of metal. But it didn't change the world. It did get them into the American charts. They got into like number 29 on the Billboard charts, which was, quite a big deal, but it wasn't an enormous #1 success or anything. Over here, it didn't really kind of broach the top 40. It did all right, but it didn't take over the world. It just seems like it did when you listen to it now.
There was a great expectation in the media. Mick Wall gave it a 5K review in Kerrang, which is, he was absolutely spot on. He described it earlier as both a bully and a king. So he could see that it was heavy and dark and oppressive, but he could also see that it was thoroughly accessible. This wasn't an album purely for the thrash metal crowd. This was an album for the whole rock metal community, and so it proved. it transcended that whole genre and became a much bigger thing. And it ended up selling 6 million copies in the US alone. To put that in context, Metallica had no airplay and they made no promotional videos. Now this sounds insane now because those things go without saying. Metallica didn't see themselves as a kind of band to do things like that. They didn't see themselves as being a commercial entity. So the fact that they managed to achieve those kind of album sales and that kind of a fan base without airplay, without promotional videos, well, that tells you how great an album Master of Puppets really was.
Do I wish it was longer? Hell no. You know, it's just as long as it ought to be. At the time, 40 minutes was basically what a vinyl album was, and they came out with an album that was over 50 minutes long, with only 8 tracks. Everything just goes into kind of longevity that you don't expect from metal bands. And the fact that now you have metal albums going on for upwards of 70 minutes, it's got absolutely nothing to do with artistic necessity. It's just the CD format. That's what people want from their albums now. And sometimes to their artistic detriment. The stuff that would have been just tossed out on the B-sides of singles is now on the album. And so you don't get albums with the same power as Master of Puppets. I think people now look at it and say, why is it so short? Whereas back in the day, people were looking at it saying, why is it so long? But no, it's exactly as long as it ought to be.
Sing it for me!
While Master of Puppets isn't really the greatest metal album ever made, it's certainly in the top 10, if only for its influence and the way that it kind of pushed the envelope of what metal could be and what people expected from metal. It's just the influence that it's had. It's just the way it's made metal bigger than the metal that it's, you know, when they went into the actual making of the album, metal was smaller than what it was at the end of that album. It introduced the world to the Metallica that we now all know and love. And that's why every home should have one.
It's very hard to judge Master of Puppets from a 20-year viewpoint because the death of Cliff 6-7 months after it was released kind of sealed it in a time capsule. If he had stayed with them, the likelihood is they'd have gone on to make an album better and then another one better and so on and so on. And rather than looking back on Master of Puppets as a benchmark or a landmark in their career, we may well have been looking back on it now the same way that one looks at the third Queen album or the third Led Zeppelin album or whatever it might be. You know, it would have been one of many. As it turns out, it was 2 albums in one. It was the first and the last album they ever made where they really captured the essence of what that lineup was about.
I would classify Metallica as a standalone band, in that they were a metal band, but they were so influential, and are indeed so influential, it would seem to me. But they are an important band in the way that Nirvana are an important band. However, it's much less convenient to make that case for Metallica. A, because they've made several, or at least a number of shitty albums, if not shitty songs. They've not always made sense as a narrative. They've not always done what you'd like them to do. They've made mistakes, yet, however, their single-mindedness, their intensity, their brilliance when it matters, it cannot be matched. They're always remarkable. Whether they're always any good, or whether even they'll be any good ever again, I fervently hope so. They might not be, they will always be remarkable. And I think that explains the intensity of their audience and the intensity of the band themselves. It's a monster.
friends.